Some towns seem frozen in time. Hollow Creek was one of them. Tucked deep between rolling hills and thick forests, it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. The streets were quiet after sunset. Neighbors waved from their porches, and the biggest news of the week was usually a lost dog or a broken fence. People often said nothing bad ever happened in Hollow Creek. They were wrong. It began on a cold October morning. A thick layer of fog drifted through the streets, swallowing buildings until they appeared like ghosts emerging from the mist. At dawn, the owner of the local bakery unlocked the front door and noticed something unusual. The church bell had been ringing, not once, not twice, but continuously. No one rang the church bell before sunrise. Curious residents slowly made their way toward the old stone church at the center of town. By the time the sheriff arrived, nearly 30 people had gathered in silence. The church doors stood wide open. Inside, the bell rope swayed gently, as though someone had pulled it only moments before. At the base of the altar lay the body of Harold Whitmore. Harold was 72 years old and had lived in Hollow Creek his entire life. He wasn't just wealthy, he practically owned half the town. His family had founded the local sawmill decades earlier, and many residents either worked for him or rented land from him. From the outside, Harold appeared generous. He donated to the school, paid for repairs to the church, sponsored community festivals. But beneath the polished reputation, whispers had followed him for years. People claimed he had ruined lives with bad business deals. Others believed he had quietly bought properties from struggling families for almost nothing before selling them for enormous profits. Nothing had ever been proven. Now, none of it mattered. Harold Whitmore was dead. The sheriff quickly sealed the church, asking everyone to return home, while investigators searched for evidence. The first discovery raised more questions than answers. Harold still wore his expensive gold watch. His wallet remained in his pocket. His keys were untouched. Nothing had been stolen. Whatever had happened inside the church wasn't a robbery. It was personal. As investigators searched the room, they noticed something strange. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no overturned furniture. The pews stood perfectly aligned. Candles remained neatly arranged. The entire church looked untouched, except for one detail: a single muddy footprint. It rested on the polished wooden floor near the altar. Just one. No matching prints entered the church. No matching prints left it. Only one muddy footprint. It made no sense. News spread quickly through Hollow Creek. Within hours, rumors were growing faster than facts. Some believed an outsider had wandered into town. Others whispered about revenge. A few older residents spoke quietly about a decades-old secret they refused to explain. Then investigators uncovered something unexpected. Harold had spent the previous evening attending the annual Harvest Festival. Hundreds of people had seen him there. Photographs showed him laughing, shaking hands, eating pie during the baking competition. He looked perfectly healthy. But several photographs also revealed something else. He wasn't alone. Standing near him in nearly every picture was a young woman no one recognized. She appeared in the background over and over again, watching him, never smiling. No one could remember speaking to her. No one knew where she had come from. So, even stranger, security footage from the festival entrance showed everyone who arrived that evening, everyone except her. It was as though she had simply appeared in the middle of town. Investigators tracked down everyone who had spoken with Harold that night. Most described him as cheerful. One witness remembered Harold checking his watch repeatedly. Another said he looked nervous after receiving a folded piece of paper from someone in the crowd. Unfortunately, no one could identify who handed him the note. When detectives searched Harold's pockets, They found it folded neatly inside his coat. The message contained only 6 words. Tonight, the truth finally catches up. There was no signature, no fingerprints, nothing else. The handwriting matched no one in town. As investigators dug into Harold's past, they uncovered a surprising detail. Exactly 25 years earlier, another resident had vanished without a trace. His name was Thomas Hale. Thomas had owned a small farm on the edge of Hollow Creek before suddenly disappearing one autumn evening. Despite extensive searches, neither Thomas nor his truck had ever been found. Eventually, the case went cold. Within months of the disappearance, Harold Whitmore purchased Thomas's abandoned farm at a remarkably low price. Most people thought little of it at the time. Now, investigators wondered if the two cases were somehow connected. The more they searched, the stranger things became. Harold's office contained meticulous financial records stretching back 40 years. Everything was organized. Everything except one drawer. It was completely empty, except for a faint rectangular outline in the dust. Something important had been removed very recently. Whoever took it knew exactly what they were looking for. That evening, rain began falling across Hollow Creek. The sheriff decided to revisit the church one final time before locking it for the night. The muddy footprint near the altar had already been photographed. But when the sheriff stepped inside, it was gone. Not faded, not smeared, gone. The polished floor looked as though the footprint had never existed. No one had entered the church since investigators sealed it. The sheriff slowly looked around the empty sanctuary. Everything was exactly as before. Almost. The bell rope was moving again, very gently, back and forth. Although there wasn't the slightest breeze, the sheriff approached cautiously. Tied around the rope was a small leather key. It hadn't been there that morning. Attached to it was another handwritten note. This one was even shorter. "You're looking in the wrong place." The mystery surrounding Harold Whitmore's death had just become much larger than a single murder. Someone wasn't simply hiding the truth. Someone was carefully guiding the investigation, and they seemed to be one step ahead of everyone. By the next morning, Hollow Creek no longer felt like the peaceful town it had always claimed to be. The sheriff pinned 3 pieces of evidence to the investigation board: the anonymous notes, the mysterious key, and the photograph of the unidentified woman from the Harvest Festival. Individually, they meant very little. Together, they suggested that someone had planned every step of the investigation long before Harold Whitmore's body was discovered. The leather key was the first real breakthrough. After trying dozens of locks around town, the sheriff finally found a match at the old Whitmore sawmill. Once the heart of Hollow Creek's economy, the mill had sat abandoned for nearly 15 years, slowly being reclaimed by vines and rust. Inside, dust coated every machine, and the silence was almost overwhelming. The key unlocked a small office tucked away on the 2nd floor. At first glance, the room appeared empty. But behind a large filing cabinet, investigators discovered a narrow steel door hidden in the wall. Beyond it was a cramped records room. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with ledgers, handwritten journals, property deeds, and correspondence dating back decades. It was Harold Whitmore's private archive. The documents painted a very different picture of the respected businessman. Over 30 years, Harold had quietly acquired dozens of struggling farms and businesses. Many sales were legal, others were not. Several signatures appeared to have been forged. Loans had been manipulated. Families had been pressured into selling for a fraction of what their land was worth. One folder stood apart from the rest. It bore a single name: Thomas Hale. Inside were photographs of Thomas's farm, legal documents transferring ownership to Harold, and a handwritten letter Thomas had never mailed. In it, Thomas claimed he had uncovered evidence that Harold was falsifying land records to seize valuable properties throughout the county. The letter ended with one chilling sentence: "If anything happens to me, don't believe it was an accident." Investigators suddenly had a possible motive, but they still had no proof linking Harold to Thomas's disappearance or explaining Harold's own death. As news spread, long-buried memories began surfacing. Residents who had stayed silent for decades finally came forward. One recalled hearing a violent argument between Harold and Thomas shortly before the disappearance. Another remembered seeing Harold's truck near Thomas's farm late one rainy night. Individually, the stories were weak. Together, they formed a disturbing pattern. Then, another discovery changed everything. A volunteer searching near the abandoned Hale property noticed that one section of the ground had sunk after several days of rain. Archaeologists were called in. Beneath the collapsed earth lay the remains of an old pickup truck. Inside were human remains. Dental records confirmed the identity. Thomas Hale had been there for 25 years. The county was stunned. The mystery everyone had forgotten had finally been solved. But one question remained: who had killed Harold Whitmore? As investigators re-examined every piece of evidence, the answer had been sitting in front of them all along. The photographs from the Harvest Festival. When the sheriff enlarged each image, he noticed something unusual. The mysterious woman wasn't watching Harold. She was watching the town. Every photograph showed her looking toward different buildings, different streets, different faces. It was almost as if she was making sure everyone was exactly where they were supposed to be. Then the sheriff noticed something else. Near the edge of one photograph stood a small memorial plaque dedicated to Thomas Hale. The woman was staring directly at it. The sheriff contacted neighboring counties, circulating her photograph once again. This time, someone recognized her. Her name was Grace Hale, Thomas Hale's daughter. She had left Hollow Creek shortly after her father's disappearance, when she was only 10 years old. Most of the town hadn't seen her in 25 years. Few would have recognized the little girl she had become. Grace was located less than 48 hours later. She didn't run. She didn't deny visiting Hollow Creek. She calmly admitted she had returned for the Harvest Festival. She admitted following Harold throughout the evening. She admitted placing the anonymous notes, but she denied killing him. Her explanation surprised everyone. Grace had spent years investigating her father's disappearance. After discovering evidence hidden among old family papers, she returned to Hollow Creek, hoping to confront Harold. She wanted the truth. Instead, she claimed she found Harold already dead, inside the church. Afraid no one would believe her, she panicked. Rather than calling the police immediately, she left the notes and the key, hoping investigators would uncover Harold's secret history and finally find her father. It sounded unbelievable, yet every detail of her story matched the evidence. She had fingerprints on the notes, none on Harold. She knew where the archive was, because her father had written about it decades earlier. She had guided investigators, not away from the truth, but toward it. If Grace hadn't returned, Thomas Hale's remains might never have been found, which meant someone else had still murdered Harold Whitmore. The investigation took one final turn. During a routine review of church maintenance records, an investigator noticed that Harold had scheduled a private meeting at the church on the night he died. Only one other name appeared in the appointment book: Reverend Samuel Brooks. The elderly minister had served Hollow Creek for almost 40 years. Soft-spoken and respected, he had never once been considered a suspect. When questioned again, the Reverend admitted meeting Harold that night. Harold had come to confess, not to Thomas Hale's death, but to decades of fraud that had destroyed countless lives. He planned to reveal everything publicly the following morning. According to the Reverend, the confession became heated. Harold admitted that guilt had haunted him for years. As the argument intensified, Harold suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed. An autopsy confirmed what investigators had initially overlooked. Harold had suffered a massive heart attack. There were no injuries, no poison, no signs of violence. The original assumption of murder had been wrong. The shock of finally confronting the consequences of his past had triggered a fatal medical emergency. The Reverend, terrified that no one would believe his story, after years of keeping Harold's secrets, made a terrible decision. Instead of calling for help immediately, he rang the church bell and fled. His silence had transformed a natural death into what appeared to be an impossible murder. In the months that followed, every fraudulent land transfer uncovered in Harold's hidden archive was overturned. Several families reclaimed property that had been lost for decades. Thomas Hale was finally laid to rest beside his wife. Grace attended the funeral quietly before leaving Hollow Creek once again. She never returned. The old sawmill was demolished. The church remained open. And each October, when the Harvest Festival returned, the townspeople remembered that the greatest danger to Hollow Creek had never been a mysterious killer. It had been the secrets they had all allowed to remain buried. Because in small towns, the truth has a way of waiting patiently. And no matter how many years pass, it is always found in the end.